It's with respect that I turn to Baroness Ross Altman, who was one of the peers, a Conservative peer in the House of Lords, who broke the whip in the other direction. She broke the government whip and voted with the opposition. And I'm glad to say she joins me now. Ross, welcome to the show.
Hi, George. Thank you.
Now, just explain to the listeners who may not, probably don't read Hansard in the House of Lords as much as you and I, what happened? What was the division and how was it decided?
Well, essentially, we were debating the EU withdrawal bill in the House of Lords last night. That was the sixth day of what's called report stage, and a number of amendments have been tabled. And those peers, such as myself, who felt that the amendments to the bill were overwhelmingly in the national interest and wanted MPs to reconsider whether they might want to actually amend the bill to fit in with those recommendations, voted with our consciences, as you were describing before, that you've done in the past, to fulfil our constitutional duty, actually, which is to scrutinise legislation. If we think there are some problems with it, to send it back to the MPs to think again.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are tensions in the Lords that didn't exist for me in the Commons, in that I was elected by people who could unelect me if they disapproved of the stand I made with my conscience. One obvious tension, you would expect me to ask this,
Sure.
is that you are not elected and cannot be unelected, and therefore was it a bigger step for you to stand on your conscience when you know what the referendum result was?
I actually see it rather the other way around, George. Yes, we are not an elected house. We are a second chamber. We're a scrutinising chamber. And I don't believe it is the role of the House of Lords to make the final decision at all. That is properly and rightly in our Constitution the role of the elected MPs in the House of Commons. But what our job is to be that second chamber, the checks and balances in our Constitution that say, just hang on a minute, maybe you should have another discussion about this and see if you're really, really comfortable or whether you actually think the amendments that we're suggesting to you might be something that you would like now to include. But it is up to the MPs to make the final decision. It is not up to the House of Lords, and it is not up to us, because, as you rightly say, we're not elected, we're the second chamber.
Now, in the past, whips were fearsome creatures that would crunch your knuckles if you dared to say that the party line was not for you and you were going to break it. How did the government whips whip this vote? Did you come under any exceptional pressure?
Well, I can only tell you that it is something that one doesn't do lightly. I did not vote against the whip on a whim. This is something that I feel passionately about, and that those of us that did vote in the way we did genuinely did so because we believe it's in the national interest. And also, the House of Lords is not as political as the House of Commons. I mean, in fact, if all the House of Lords is expected to do is trot behind the whips and do exactly what the government says, I can't see the point of having the House of Lords. We should be there to exercise our independent judgment, obviously to support the government as much as we possibly can, or support the party that we represent as much as we can. But at the end of the day, if we vote against what we truly believe in without fulfilling our duty of asking MPs to think again, then quite frankly, I feel we might as well not be there. And that's not how our country is supposed to be run. Our country is supposed to be set up with this constitution where there's the second chamber that advises the first chamber, but it's the MPs in the Commons that have the final say.
What do you think it's done for Theresa May's leadership? She had a particularly bad day today. 6 questions on Brexit from Jeremy Corbyn, who was outperforming his normal dispatch box performance, by all accounts, by every media, left, right, and centre. And she really was at sea today. This Brexit business is definitely getting her down and could even bring her down, no?
I certainly hope not. I don't envy the Prime Minister one bit. She's in a terribly difficult position. And quite frankly, the Labour Party is all over the place on Brexit. It's all very well for them to stand there and criticise, but their position is utterly incoherent too. Parliament is all at sea. And actually, in a way, what has been happening gradually over the last few weeks is that backbenchers are trying to re-establish control for Parliament of the Brexit process, because in some ways it's been a bit hijacked by extremists on both the right and the left, and most of Parliament is not extreme. We're not an extreme country.
This is another tension, though, isn't it? Because there's the normal tension of politics in our country in this era being party politics rather than individual. There's the tension between the elected House and the unelected one. But there's a third tension here, because those who voted in the referendum were told by the then Prime Minister David Cameron in writing that the government would implement what the people decided. And so what we've got, you could argue, I would be far too polite to do so with you, but one could argue that this is not just a betrayal of party principles or a deviation from party principles, but a deviation from democracy itself by an unelected House voting in defiance of the result of the referendum.
Once again, George, I think this whole line of thought is misrepresenting what is going on here. We're not making the decision. We are not dictating Brexit. And indeed, the whole point of the legislation and the bill and all the hours and hours we're spending debating this late into the night is because we're representing, respecting the referendum. The British people asked us to find the best way to leave the EU. What they didn't tell us was the direction of travel, how it should happen, how it would best happen. They certainly didn't vote for us to undermine our industrial success or to damage the economy. So we're trying to work through the best way that we can achieve what the British people have asked us to do. And that doesn't mean blindly saying, well, we're just going to come out whatever the cost. It actually means finding the best way of doing that, which is exactly the point of the legislation that we are working on. And that's respecting our democracy, but also respecting our parliamentary sovereignty. We are a parliamentary democracy, and our parliament works in particular ways. And it's very unhelpful with so many parts of the media portraying what is happening in our parliamentary democracy as somehow anti-democratic. It's exactly the way our country has always been governed and needs to continue to be governed if we're going to continue to be a parliamentary democracy.
My lady, you have nobly defended your corner. I'm grateful to you for doing so. Thanks for joining us on the show, Baroness Ross Altman. And now we have a Labour Member of Parliament, a fellow Brexit campaigner as I was myself. She's the very distinguished MP for Vauxhall, Kate Hoy. Kate, thanks for joining us on the show this evening.
Good evening.
Now, I put it, as you'd expect me to Baroness Altman, that there was the potential for an accusation of double betrayal on a member of the unelected House of Lords, contradicting the will of the people in the referendum, as well as, in her case, a breach of Conservative Party discipline. In the House of Commons, of course, it's more simple. You're elected, can be unelected, and everybody always knew where you stood on the Brexit issue. But it still must be causing a tension for you that the Labour Party's line on Brexit is far less clear than your own.
Yes, and the line does seem to change depending who's actually being interviewed. But I'm not alone. There are a number of us, and I think when we get these amendments back from the House of Lords, there will actually be more Labour MPs than ever before who will send them back, because we cannot allow this to happen. Now, of course, the House of Lords has a really important role of scrutinising and making suggestions and so on. But my problem is, and I've always been a reasonable supporter of a House of Lords, because I do think the second chamber can be useful. But this time it's so very clearly that a large number of the Lords have actually been so angry that the country voted in the way they think they shouldn't have, in other words, voted to leave, that they're quite determined to stop Brexit. And they're using all sorts of different machinations and amendments to slow down the process, to make it as difficult as possible. And of course, what annoys me even more is that so many of these Lords are people who are in receipt of pensions from having worked in the European Union or being European Union commissioners, or have been involved in some way or other with the EU, and are not elected, and they don't even have to declare their interest, their pension. So I've never genuinely, George, seen so much annoyance here in the Commons about how the Lords are behaving, and even Conservatives who, one always thought would always stick up for the House of Lords, are actually saying, look, if we reverse these and send them back, and the Lords send them back again, then that is, the beginning, I believe, of the end of the Lords, because they are actually then going to show that they're not just about, checking us and asking us to look at things again, but they really want to stop Brexit.
Well, I hope it isn't abolished before you grace it with your presence, Kate. But do you agree with me that if the House of Commons were to pass the same amendment that the House of Lords did, that would mean that the referendum had all been an expensive waste of time? Because if we remained in the single market, we would not be leaving the European Union.
Yeah, no. Absolutely, and this idea that staying in the EEA, as they want to describe it, is just completely against everything that people voted for. And I find it so patronising of people like Lord Mandelson and all these Lords who go on about how people didn't really know what they were voting for. Well, I did rallies and meetings all over the country, as you did, and you heard from people, and they knew what they were voting, and they wanted to get out of the European Union. They don't want to be out and half in and half out. They want to be out, and we have an opportunity here to really, get a future that is not tied into the shackles of this neoliberal organisation. And the predictions that everything that would happen if we voted to leave have been proved wrong, and now they're starting again all this fear idea of what would happen if we don't stay in the single market, if we don't stay in the customs union. But that would be leaving in name only. Absolutely. It would just not be right. And I really do think it would be, it's not too exaggerating to say that it would, cause a huge crisis, and particularly in some of the Labour areas who strongly voted to leave. That's why I'm very confident still that, led by Jeremy, who's always been an EU sceptic, that he will resist the pressure, which he's getting from all over within the party, from some of his own party, to go for this so-called soft Brexit. There's no such thing as a soft Brexit. A soft Brexit, in the eyes of the people who voted for some of these amendments in the Lords, is staying in.
Indeed, as one can't be a little bit pregnant, one can't Brexit a little bit. Now, they are determined, though, aren't they? And it seems to me that there is every likelihood that in the Commons as well as in the Lords, there is a parliamentary majority against Brexit. They cannot openly declare it in the voting lobbies, but there are many ways to skin a cat, and it's likely to me that we will reach a complete impasse on this when whatever terms the Prime Minister brings back will not pass either house and will therefore be into the territory of a Brexit general election or a second referendum. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I don't, I prefer it to you because these things are always better. But quite honestly, if the deal is so awful, then I'm very happy to simply leave, and we wouldn't have to pay the huge amounts of money that we've agreed to pay. The idea that somehow people will not be able to trade is just so ridiculous. We always seem to think that we need the EU more than they need us. They actually sell more to us than we don't need them as much as they need us. And
right.
I'm very keen to actually stand up for the country more. I mean, I'm a bit disappointed in the way the whole negotiations have gone. But another referendum would be genuinely, I think, if we had another referendum now, it would be a bigger vote to leave, because I've met so many people who voted to remain, who have been completely, I better not say it in language, but who've been completely angry, very, very angry at the way the EU has been treating us the whole way. This sort of Barnier has been basically trying to bully us, and I just wish we'd be much tougher and stand up to them. And we're a strong country. We don't need the EU. The rest of the world is not in the EU, and there's this sort of mindset that somehow if you're not in the EU, you can't trade. And of course, a lot of these things are coming from the big multinational global, the CBI. Everyone talks about the CBI wanting to stay in the single market and wanting to stay in the customs union. Of course they do, because they've got this, they want to keep their, monopoly power, whereas it's the small businesses who have very little to do with the EU. And let's remember, so many businesses in this country don't sell to the EU at all, and yet they are bound by every single little bit of extra red tape that the EU decides to put on for its own cartel purposes. And then there's all the question we needn't go into now, but the whole question of the way that we actually work against developing countries and stop them being able to develop, because the EU wants to have that
yes.
cartel of stopping it, stopping goods coming in from African countries, when we could be actually helping those countries develop better by getting out of the EU.
Finally, Kate, I'm grateful for your time. Theresa May had a very bad PMQs today. All journalists are unanimous on that. Corbyn had 6 goes, all on Brexit. Where do we stand, do you think, at the end of that? It seemed to me, watching it, that support for Theresa May is beginning to ebb away.
Well, there have been discussions and talks, amongst various MPs about what would happen. I think the reality is that, there is no desire amongst the Conservatives to have a general election. And I think the feeling that if they try to remove her out, first of all, who could they all coalesce around? Who would actually be the one that they would support? And would that cause a general election, which obviously they would fear, because they would fear that Jeremy would win that election. It would be a very tough election for Labour, as we've seen with the council elections. It's not going to be an easy battle to win, and it certainly won't be won by Labour if we are seen to renege on all those people all over the country who put their faith in Labour and our manifesto, which was that we would recognise the result, we would honour it,
accept
we
it,
would
yes.
be leaving and accept it. So I don't know. I think you see, the Prime Minister has really, her legacy is going to be based on whether she can deliver Brexit or not. If she doesn't, what is she left with? So I would be wary that she will be pushed. And a lot of people who know her a lot better than I do say that she is genuinely determined to get us out. But of course, it's how we get out and what we're left with at the end as to whether it's going to be any better. And I certainly will continue to. And we've got, we're not giving up here in the House of Commons on this. We're going to win this.
Kate Hoy, Member of Parliament for Vauxhall, a Labour Member of Parliament, supporter of Brexit. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.